Having worked as a product manager for a number of years and keeping in touch with various other people applying for product manager roles, I thought it made perfect sense to talk about what are the most commonly asked questions for a product manager interview, and to add a few notes as we go through each of these. And the first question, probably the most commonly asked one, would be, tell me about one of your products, which I believe it should go without saying that you should prepare for this one in advance, because it's inevitable that you would want to talk about some of the main highlights in your career. Now, what are some elements to be particularly careful of while speaking out about these things from an HR perspective? This would be that you always want to show as leading through influence rather than authority. And it's for younger people, this is not a big deal, but especially for older people, when the transition to new ways of thinking and so on and so forth might not be so easy to grasp from the way you talk. So if you are talking about the products that you manage and the products that you design, ensure that you are showing as leading through influence rather than authority. And also, of course, as with any product manager, it also makes sense to say that to show confidence with these things. The second question that makes perfect sense to ask a product manager is, how would you deal with a difficult colleague? And in my opinion, after the capability to design new products and to have that design thinking required for a product manager, the next most important element is to be able to manage teams of people effectively. And needless to say, it's impossible to always get along with everyone at any point in time for months or years in a row. In my opinion, that would be a very bad team in the first place. So be prepared to answer questions about working with other people. The third question I want to talk about here is, why do you want to work for this company? And while this might seem a generic question, it's one that it is worthwhile preparing in advance. One template, if you want here, although I do not really recommend templating your answers too much, would be that you want to praise the company. You want to give three reasons. The first would be you praise the company. The second is your unique value proposition, why you when compared to others. The third one is what's in for you, or where do you see yourself 5 years from now, if you want to talk from a career standpoint. But this is another type of question that you usually want to prepare in advance. How would you make the pricing strategy when or if the company released a new product? Also expect tons of follow-up questions for these things. And very important to understand here is why anyone would ask you such an open-ended question. Well, it could be any product, it could be any pricing strategy. Well, they mainly ask you this to see how your thinking, your ability to deal with ambiguity, with ambiguous situations. So whenever you're dealt with such an open-ended question, ensure that you ask follow-up questions. Ensure that you divide the problem to get to the core problem here. Like, for example, I remember someone applying for a product manager at Facebook, I think, yeah. It was that they were asked the question, how would you deal with fake news? And while the question might sound like very clear at first, well, Facebook is such a big business that it doesn't make sense to deal with fake news in one region exactly the same as with other regions. So the first question would tell me, okay, in what context do you want to work? Do you want to deal with fake news? And even further, in what type of product do you want to deal with this type of fake news? So the idea here is you must get to the bottom of the problem. You must really make the problem more finite, so you could eventually have some interesting conclusion and eventually have your best answer for this one. How do you make trade-offs between quality and cost if you are managing a new product? So the idea that having a new product with an unlimited budget is, is science fiction. So they want to see a bit your frugality on how do you prioritize things here. So be prepared to, maybe you can think of a scenario where you had to ideally work with such an event, but the point is you should expect these types of questions as well. How would you help Amazon enter a new market? Or, Amazon or any other company enter a new market? Again, try to think of an example, or at least at follow-up questions that would allow you to isolate the specific scenario that you would feel most comfortable dealing with here, and try to come up with the best possible answer. And by the way, there's also a book, the Product Manager Interview at Amazon, that I would recommend. I would recommend you to read if you can. The online version, I think, works pretty well. Just to see how an ex-product manager working in a large corporation would deal with these rather open-ended questions. So take this book as a great exercise or a great reading exercise for these things. How do you prioritize workload? So this is another one about dealing with ambiguity and about management and about the non-product side of things, which again to me are very important, and you should always have a clear management philosophy in your mind, and you should of course ideally come up with a precise example showcasing on a time when you prioritize something challenging. Tell me about a poorly designed product that you made. So this is more of a failure story that you want to think of, and it's impossible that you didn't have one if you're applying for a product manager role. But the point here is that you prepare it in advance, so you have the best possible story here. I have a ton of videos on failure stories and how to talk about failures on my channel if you're interested in that type of scenarios. So there you go. These will be some examples of questions you should expect as a product manager role, and hopefully at least some of this information was useful in preparing you to further tune up your answers and to know what to expect and how to deal with uncommon situations during a job interview.